already there. And before I go any further, you'll notice how red I am. Yes, I was out in the sun too much yesterday. I was out by the water, and so I got a little bit red all over, especially right here. So at any rate, a little bit sunburned, but actually it felt pretty good. And I'm trying to get ready for summer now. So anyway, no, this isn't a lighting problem. I really did get sunburned a little bit. Just so you know, hello everyone. It's good that you're here. Today, of course, is the 17th of May, 2022. And I'm Roy Potter. Thanks for coming in. Thank you for letting me know I'm 5 by 5 there, KRA. I think that's the name. And Anon, thanks so much. Well, what am I talking about in this title? Well, I don't see how anybody could even question what I'm talking about. Our nation, the leaders, the representatives, the corruption, the crimes, the thievery against us and against people in the world, the murders, everything that's going on, this nation has nothing going for it any longer. And a lot of people, I've even had good friends call me up and say, Roy, what's this anti-American talk you're doing? And of course, I talk a lot about what's going on in Ukraine. And it's really disheartening to me that people do not understand that if we do not hold our country accountable for what it does, our national leaders and these people that we put into office, if we don't hold them accountable, that's what's anti-American, is not holding them accountable and calling them to account. And I don't mean just through elections anymore, because obviously that doesn't even work. Some other things have to happen, and I'm not here to talk about what those are, but it's really past time to say, Roy, you're un-American because you don't support your country, whether it's right or wrong. You're damn right I don't support it, whether it's right or wrong. If it's devoid of principle, it doesn't deserve support. So I'll just say it out front. And I'm really tired of Americans turning a blind eye to what their country does and says that I'm un-American because I want to hold our feet to the fire. And I see other countries doing things for their people that our country and our national leaders don't do for us. They do for everybody else before they do for us. Look at the border on the south. They want to do away with the law that restricts immigration now. Mayorkas talked about that, the head of the DHS. Yet we're concerned about the Ukrainian border with what Russia's doing there, or any other border. We leave all of the equipment we did in Afghanistan because we can't win a war. All we are is about grifting and stealing from the American people and from others in the world to support the corrupt government, the military intelligence complex. It's just unbelievable. And yes, I am going to say that America is disgusting right now. And I have been saying it for a long time, and I stand by it, and all of the evidence is there to prove it. So I don't want anybody ever calling me anti-American again, because I call these people on the carpet. And if you do, well, we'll have to have some words. Just before I went on, I saw that Ukraine is putting on trial a Russian soldier who was captured, apparently for war crimes, because he supposedly killed some civilians. Well, what has Western Ukraine been doing in the Donbass and Donetsk area for the last since 2014? The last 8 years. What have they been doing there? And nobody in this country was calling them on the carpet for it. Well, this little situation, I'm not defending this Russian. What I'm saying is that it's a two-tiered justice system, and they're in the middle of a war there. I was almost said we are, because our stupid ass leaders want us to be at war with Russia for a lot of reasons. But I noticed Zelensky in Ukraine hauled this Russian out to accuse him of war crimes. Well, the reason why they did it now, if you're paying attention, is because with the capture of all of those Azov Nazis in the Azovstal steelworks, there's a lot that's going to come out with that. The Russians are already talking about putting a lot of those guys on trial for what they did. So Zelensky and his turd face bullshit. Excuse me. They're trying to get out ahead of it. Well, frankly, I think that if Putin was really serious about you, Zelensky, he'd send his Spetsnaz and his FSB after you and collar your ass and put you on trial. Yeah, I'm a little hot under the collar, but then again, like I said, I got sunburned. All right, so I am a little warmer than usual. Right. Well, let's go down the list here. I do have a few notes. I thought I'd better. We are going to end up on a little spiritual discussion at the end to try to, mitigate some of this, or at least give some reason why this world is all messed up the way it is, especially the nations that tout freedom. Oh, Biden's the leader of the free world. Well, you know what? The way he's doing it, that's nothing to brag about, because we're not free. Now they want to go to the who is that? Who is that? Read between the lines. Who is that? Who is that? And take away sovereignty on health issues. Boy, whether the devil's real or not, that spirit is definitely running rampant, and that's what we're going to talk about towards the end of this a little bit. So just to clear the air, Mariupol had been basically taken over by the Russians several weeks back. And there's been a holdout in the Azovstal steelworks there, that very large area, that steel factory. And it's because a lot of things were placed there, as Brian from the New Atlas has explained, and several others. We really don't know what else is in there. The Russians will certainly let everybody know. There's been some hints that there were not just mercenaries, but members of foreign armed forces, high officers, etc., that were in there. There may be a lot of things that are going to come out. Again, Zelensky's trying to get ahead of this with this supposed trial of this Russian soldier, which is he thinks is going to put basically a lid on what's coming out. And unfortunately, with our Western MSM and what they are doing exactly what the CIA and the people that want to cause this war with Russia, that they are doing exactly what they want. We're going to talk about that a little bit here in a few minutes too. There's no question that our mainstream media is nothing more than the propaganda arm of the CIA and the MI6. So at any rate, this was not an evacuation of the soldiers, of these Nazi soldiers, the Azov battalion. This was not an evacuation, as Zelensky and others have been trying to push. This is a surrender. They are being evacuated, those who are injured. The Russians are giving them medical treatment. That is happening, but then to try to say that it's being overseen by international authorities to make sure that the evacuation goes well, as Zelensky says. No, Zelensky, you lost that factory now. You've lost it. You lying piece of crap. But that's what war is. The first casualty of war is truth. And unfortunately, that's especially true with our nation and people like Biden. At any rate, it's not an evacuation. It was a surrender, and it's ongoing at this point. I don't know how many have surrendered at this point. I think it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 500. We're going to see the rest of them come out because they don't want to face the full onslaught of that Russian force with just a few guys left in there, unless they really do want to commit suicide. All right, so just to clear that up, it's not an evacuation out of the Azovstal works there. It is a surrender, and more and more are coming out all the time. All right, I wanted to mention that I put out a tweet the other day. Someone asked me on Twitter about how I felt about George Webb's explanation of what's going on in Ukraine. and the foreseeable future, especially with NATO itching to get involved, with Finland coming into NATO and Sweden, which is a big mistake, by the way. Uh, I could go into the history of Finland. They want to make a big deal that Russia invaded them in 1939, but what they fail to talk about is that the Germans were taking them over, and and Russia came. And of course, that was the Soviet Union too. So we're talking about communist Soviet Russia. Uh, that's a whole different circumstance of what's going on now, but they're trying to link those in. But what they always forget is that the Germans were there. And as a matter of fact, when the Finns finally did kick the Russians out, the Germans came in again anyway. And they conveniently forget about all that. Finland's got a problem. They're gutless or they're stupid. Maybe it's both. I'm not sure. And the same goes for Sweden if they go for this. But to get into NATO, bad idea. Bad idea, and I'm calling it out right now. Bad idea, Finland. So, where I think with this little exchange that was going on with this person on on Twitter, having me talk about George Webb's information on the biolabs and the different things that were going on in Ukraine, but also with Scott Ritter. If you all remember Scott Ritter, he was one of the weapons inspectors. Was saying that there are no WMDs in Iraq. You know, that whole thing. He was courageous enough to come out on that. He and Ray McGovern were being interviewed by oh, I forget his name right now, but at any rate, it was an interview that those two were giving, and they were explaining a lot of this. And I think that they were right in just about everything. Of course, they have a lot more information than I have. But where the question came in is, what is Russia going to do with all of this equipment that's being sent in by NATO and the U.S.? And as Brian from the New Atlas has pointed out, getting the equipment is one thing. Being able to use it in a synchronized manner on the battlefield is another matter entirely. However, I don't underestimate the Ukrainians because unfortunately they've had training from the U.S. and NATO for the last 8 years. They've been, and before that, we've been there doing this for a long time. We haven't heard this very much about this Major General Courtier, who was apparently captured some time ago. At least that was the claim. And now there's another retired four-star admiral that apparently may have American admiral that may have been captured as well. And he apparently was at the steelworks. I don't know all the details of that. The Russians are keeping it close to chest because I think they're going to bring all of this stuff out to the UN along with the biolab information that they found and how those labs have been funded. As a matter of fact, and supported by the West. There's a whole lot of information that the Russian Ministry of Defense put out showing the interconnections of all these different people, Soros, the Clintons, Biden, the United States military-industrial complex, et cetera, the State Department, all that. If you all haven't seen that chart, you probably ought to look at it. Of course, we're going to deny it because all we do is lie. That's all we do. We don't try to fix anything. We're not trying to de-escalate things in Ukraine. We're trying to get them going so that we have a nuclear exchange because there are idiots in our defense establishment and our State Department who think that we can win that. Those people need to be strung up. But anyway, getting back to the Russian thing, I agreed with everything that was going on there. My problem is, hi Liza Jean. Yeah, that's right. Russia banned GMO stuff a long time ago, and Putin was pushing to be the new leader in organic food. Yeah, very much so. Very good. Which shows he's for his people and wants some decent stuff despite all the rhetoric I hear and the lies coming from the U.S. and the NATO alliance. Getting back with Russia, what I see as being a problem, even though Brian from New Atlas said, well, getting those things, the 155s, the tanks, the air defense systems, all that, it's one thing to get them on the battlefield, it's another thing to get them integrated. However, you can't underestimate them, all right? So Russia has to stop dilly-dallying and stop being timid, okay? If that's the deal here. I know, there are pros and cons to this, but if Russia doesn't start interdicting those supply lines coming from the United States and NATO, they're going to have a large problem on their hands. I don't think that necessarily they'll lose, but what they are going to do is prolong this out way too long. Now, people will say, well, Putin's part of the WEF, so he wants this. He wants it drawn out. I've never bought into that entirely. The point is, right now, they better start interdicting and taking those combat pieces out of the equation. They better hit them before they get onto the battlefield, or it's going to get tougher. I'm not going to go into all the tactical, strategic stuff, but if you're listening to the new Atlas, he's very good. As I've also pointed out, Colonel McGregor is too, for those of you who have latched on to him. Okay, so my point is Russia has to start interdicting those supply lines further west. They have to do that. They just have to. And they're really being pushed into having to take over Ukraine totally, and that was never their original idea. They just wanted to free the Donbass, but they dilly-dallied too long. Apparently, and again, Brian from New Atlas would disagree with me on that. He'll say, well, they're doing exactly what they did in Syria, and I understand that. But we also know that he had a problem with his FSB director, Putin did, had to arrest him because apparently there was some hanky-panky going on there, and they weren't giving Putin the right information. They were doing something else behind his back, which doesn't surprise me at all. And of course, we know about the situation with these generals, how they've been taken out. So this all has to do with infiltration by the Western intelligence services. So because of that, there are some other things that need to be considered here. And I understand that Putin is now taking over from the generals the actual battle on the ground in the Donbass, and that probably isn't a bad idea. However, it looks like now that not only are they going to have to hold on to eastern Ukraine and southern Ukraine all the way down through Odessa, but they're probably going to have to go through Ukraine entirely. Because they can't allow this military buildup to continue in the western Ukraine. They can't. If they want to hold on to the eastern Donbass area, they just can't do it. So interdiction is going to have to happen. And am I anti-American because they say that? No, we started this thing. This war didn't start on February 22nd of this year. It started back in 2014 when our CIA, Soros, and State Department through Victoria Nuland and Obama overthrew the elected government of Ukraine against every agreement that we've ever made about keeping a border area, a buffer area between the USSR, or between Russia, there is no USSR now anymore, between Russia and NATO. We violated that. And we've been sending our troops in there secretive, our SOF, Special Operations Forces, for a long time. And we're seeing a lot of that now. Most of the success that the Ukrainians are having is because Americans are sitting there, or former American soldiers on the CIA's payroll, telling them how to use this equipment. We're already in that war. And I'll tell you what, I'm going to say it again. If they keep pushing this thing, I'm not even saying it's going to go nuclear, although that wouldn't be an entirely out of the question probability. But Russia, when it gets moving, it will kick NATO and the US's BS. I got to be careful not to cuss too much here. Okay? And deservedly so. So, sorry I'm losing my temper when I do. I sometimes kind of go off on a tangent, but I'm just so sick and tired of this corrupt U.S. government. Look at the situation with the Durham investigation. I saw a thing from The Last Refuge today, and that's where the title of this video comes from. That people like Barr, Rosenstein, all those people that tried to cover up for the attempt at the first coup with against Trump, whether he deserved it or not is a whole other issue. But those people helped to cover up the corruption that truly endangered our nation from within. And Barr is a traitor because of it. And so is Rosenstein and all those people for not going after the people that fomented this corruption and this attempted coup. And what the Last Refuge said, they're the conservative treehouse.com, I think, and then the Last Refuge is their Twitter handle, brought out that said, it's not so much the people that were trying to do the coup that were so bad. That was bad enough. What was really bad is the cover up afterwards, because if the people that were covering it up, like Barr, knew that the information, if it came out, would make it so that the United States could not survive, its institutions couldn't survive. And that's exactly right. But you know what? That's their plan anyway. That's been their plan for a long time, that our institutions will not survive. And that our country, America, and the Constitution, the idea of the Bill of Rights and the individual freedom, they don't want that to survive. Look what they're doing with this whole worldwide supposed infection thing, and how they've attacked it. And really not attacked it, they've attacked us. So that's why I titled this, that this country cannot survive in the situation it's in now, and that's on purpose. They are destroying it. And Americans will not wake up. I still drive around seeing people driving around in their cars with their little face shields on. I can't believe it. And I could talk about that more, but I won't right now. I've got some other things I want to say. I've looked at across the world to see, are there any leaders in this world that are really standing up for their people? Not for international organizations like the UN and WHO and all that. Not giving money to other nations that they need to take care of their own people with. $40 billion to Ukraine. Are you kidding me? And most of that's going to be money laundering that comes back into the pockets of our own politicians. I can only think of 3 leaders, and people are not going to entirely agree with me on this, but this is how I look at it. I only see 3 leaders in the entire world. There's some exceptions, like in Africa. They knocked off some of those African presidents that stood against the Gates program, okay? And then once they got rid of them, then they started to do this whole procedure there as well. But as a whole right now, I only see 3 leaders in the entire world that are standing up for their people. And no, it's nobody in the United States, not even Ted Cruz, who thinks it's more important for Ukraine to defeat Russia than it is for us to take care of our own people here at home. That's an old European argument that's been going on there for centuries. And Ted Cruz thinks that we've got to get involved. He's an ass. Or he's paid off. I'd like to know whose payroll he's on. So who are those 3 leaders? Again, you may not agree. I think the first one you'll probably agree with me. Bolsonaro from Brazil. Absolutely. The Hungarian president, I almost called it President Orbán. He absolutely cares about his people. And he's just been reelected. And the third one, you may not like it. Vladimir Putin. Putin cares about Russia. And everything he's done shows it. And he even cares about his displaced Russian people who have been tortured, murdered, warred against by the Western Ukrainian Nazis, supported by the CIA and the U.S. State Department and NATO. Putin's worried about the people that wicked Western regime has been conducting that war against those Russian people in the Donbass and the eastern Ukraine, even though they're not technically part of Russia. Well, they will be here shortly, it looks like, or at least an independent territory of some sort. I'm not sure how that's going to work out. As I said earlier, I think Putin's he's going to have to probably go a lot further now than he wanted to originally, because you can't trust America, you can't trust the United States, and you can't trust NATO. They've proven it. And in our own country, please remember Ruby Ridge, Waco. People might not really think that the Mariupol building in Oklahoma was something that we should worry about as far as our government being involved, but the government was. 9/11, of course. I could go into a lot more, but I think you get the point. So those are the 3 leaders I think are taking care of their their people and their countries. Biden goes to Buffalo because of the shooting that took place there. And of course, FBI is all over this. FBI push, at least to where they ignored the situation. I hear people say, well, uh, the FBI had their eyes on him. Well, I wouldn't use that as an excuse because the FBI has their eyes on everybody. You don't have to be a criminal. They just want to know what you're thinking. And they've said that. They want to know what you're thinking. Not even that what you're thinking about doing is bad. They just want to know what you're thinking. They want to know if you're a person of interest. If you're an interesting person, I think is the way that Brennan put it, the old CIA director. They're evil. Pure, unadulterated evil. A friend of mine on Twitter said, Roy, you got to stop saying that. You're making a target out of yourself. I've been saying it for 30 years. Why should I stop now? So Biden goes to Buffalo and says the worst thing we've got is white supremacy. Yet he's supporting the Nazis and the white supremacists who actually talk about that in Ukraine. The hypocrisy is unbelievable. Consistency cries for him standing against Ukraine, but he doesn't. But he goes after American Christians and white people. Well, the purpose, of course, is to cause a race war. That's what they're really after. And, of course, also because pure constitutionalists, even though there's some problems with the Constitution, pure constitutionalists and the Bill of Rights and those types of things, we are the threat to this illegitimate regime in D.C. We are the threat. And that's why they have to make us into criminals, because we do stand against their criminal corruption and conduct. So he's there in Buffalo talking about that, and people have rightly pointed out he never said anything about the situation in Waukesha. I think that's how you say it. I think that's right. Where the Christmas parade where the guy ran over all those kids. No word ever about that. Because the way the CRT works these days is no one can be a racist but white people. And my good black friends know that that's not true. Okay? Another incident that I think I need to just mention, this is going to be in code, all right? Yeah, or the subway shooter. Exactly, Liza Jean. Thank you. It's just all over. All over. Just the way they handle everything. And most of these things, even Ray says, the greatest problem we have is white supremacists, and they're the greatest danger. Yeah, right. Why? Again, I'll say it again, because we are a danger to their corruption and their crimes. That's true. And that's why they want to single us out, not only just to cause a race war and division, but also because they want us to be the enemy so that they don't have to take us out, that they'll get other people to take us out. Okay, a lot of information. Again, you're going to have to read between the lines here for obvious reasons. Take the E off the word that I'm about ready to use. Take the E off and you'll know what I'm talking about. The extant medical procedure is causing hive. It's causing hive. All right. Again, take the E off. That's coming out more and more all the time. We're hearing about it almost across the board. And I think it's going to get worse. I can't go into much more depth on it here, obviously. I don't know the Putin answers to Kissinger. Be really careful of that. That could even be Western disinformation. Don't just be spouting stuff. Look at the fruits. Who was that? Michael Illingworth. I want to ask you a question, Michael. All right? Where did you get that information? And people can change. All right? So be aware of the source that gives you that kind of information. I'm not saying it's incorrect in the past, but I'd be very careful about right now. Don't just be spouting something that you read in the MSM. All right. So you get my drift on the hive, right? That's increasing, and it's directly related to the extant procedure, along with a lot of little small people not making it, and then because they don't make it, a lot of the mothers are taking it out on themselves because they didn't think it through. They didn't listen. They didn't study, and so a lot of little people that have not made it because of this thing, a lot of the mothers are now ending their own lives because of it, and yet nobody does anything. And that God. That debased, lying POS Trump continues to push it. So we have all of this going on in the world, but particularly in the Western nations. The Anglo-American Alliance, NATO, Five Eyes, those things, is where most of the corruption that shouldn't be happening, but is occurring. And I've done this before, but I'm going to read it again because we've already talked about sorceries and and pharmakia and all of that that's going on. If anybody out there has followed me, well, let's read Revelation 9:21. This is where we're going to do a few spiritual things. Revelation 9:21, and this is what it says. Is that the right one? 9:21. Yeah. All right. It's talking about those who have been causing all of this grief on the earth and using their riches to deceive the earth and to cause all of this chaos. And who do you want to name? Well, of course, there's the Rothschilds. There's the the Gates folks, right? Bill Gates, etc. The Klaus Schwabs, and then people that we've never even heard of, which I'm not going to name here right now because it'd take too long. But let's read Revelation 9:21. Whether this is from God or whether it's their own playbook, it doesn't matter. It's happening this way. And this is what I see. This is what I like the most. And the rest of the men, let's start verse 20. And the rest of the men which were not killed by these plagues yet repented not of the works of their hands, that they should not worship devils and idols of gold and silver and brass and stone and of wood, which neither can see nor hear nor walk, neither repented they of their murders nor of their sorceries. That is actually pharmakia. Yes, the root word for pharmacy, and all the crazy stuff that the pharmaceutical companies are doing through the world today, nor of their fornications, nor of their thefts. That's your Bidens, your Trumps, your Ted Cruzes, your Chuck Schumers, your Pelosi's, your Bill Barrs, and just name the rest of the list because they're all on it. Bill Gates, Klaus Schwab, everybody. Like I said, we could talk about Bojo in the UK, and I don't mean Ukraine, of course. I mean the United Kingdom. Okay, I wanted to end up on something else because it has to do with where we are today and the evil that's just sprouting everywhere, unconstrained, unrestrained. You've heard me talk about Isaiah 14:12. And in Isaiah, for reasons that I've talked about before, the monks, when they translated this, they didn't want to use the name that's there because they were afraid that people would confuse that with Jesus Christ. And most of you already know what this is. It's Isaiah 14:12. It's about the fall of Lucifer. Again, Lucifer is not the name. That's what the monks put in there because it means light bearer. They substituted the real name because it was too close to Jesus' name, and I'm going to cover that in just a minute. Okay, Let's look at it and see what it says here. By the way, Roosevelt wanted me to cover the different names of God. Roosevelt, I didn't see you on here, but just so you know, that's going to be a long presentation. There are a lot of names of God. The only one that we're told we can't use in vain, however, or blaspheme, is the YHVH, right? That's the only one. But there are many, many other names of God and of Elohim, where there's a divine investiture from the supernal, supreme God to his agents, the other Elohim, his B'nai Elohim. Okay? Uh, but there are a lot of them. So I don't know if we'll be able to cover all that, but we'll cover a few. But let's read here Isaiah 14:12 so that you understand this, because I'm going to link it to another scripture. Isaiah 14 is talking about this king of Babylon. Okay, that's basically what it's talking about. And it's interesting that it's saying the king of Babylon, because actually what Isaiah is doing is likening the king of Babylon to this spiritual entity. And this is what it says, 14:12. Most of you have heard about it before. Talking about all the injustices and trying to usurp the throne and, causing all this difficulty amongst the nations. He's called the king of Babylon. But this is verse 12. Again, Isaiah 14:12. How art thou fallen from heaven? Oh, and in the King James Version and most others, it's Lucifer. Again, that's not in the Hebrew. That's a Latin term that the monks put in there. Son of the morning, how art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? See what he does? That's what he does. All right. The name Lucifer is not found in the Hebrew. What it is, and I've talked about it before, is Halel ben Shakar. It means bright star or bright light, son of the morning. He's not a B'nai Elohim. He's not a son of God. All right. Now, how do I know that? Well, first of all, it says he's Ben Shakar, not Ben Elohim. Okay, that's a giveaway right there in the Hebrew. But this entity that has fallen from heaven is likened unto the behavior of the wicked king of Babylon. Because what happens? These leaders of nations start to think that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. They take in the spirit of this evil entity. Like I said, I only know of 3 leaders of nations right now that are not in that category, at least trying to resist wanting to be evil. I've already talked about that. And again, people disagree on it, but I do know the history of what I'm talking about, okay? So there we have that in Isaiah. What I want you to do is, does anybody else know here? I'm going to have to turn this on so we can see. Does anybody else here know another reference to this being in the Old Testament? Anybody know? I'm just going to ask that question real quick. Anybody know where else this evil entity is mentioned in the Old Testament and how it's described? Why am I saying it's described? Because it's not a son of God. Well, yeah, it is mentioned in Job, but not in the way that I'm talking about. Okay. I won't keep you. Nakash, well, no, that just means serpent. I'll give it to you. Go to Ezekiel 28:14. This is going to surprise you when you find out where this evil being came from. Ezekiel 28:14. I'm going to start at the beginning of chapter 28. And again, like before, when Isaiah was talking about this fallen one from heaven and the king of Babylon being basically the same type of spirit. So in Ezekiel ties the king of Tyrus with the same being. But listen to where this being actually was. Chapter 28. And this, again, you can go back to Isaiah 14 and read the description of this being. Let me go ahead and read this to you. We're gonna go down to verse 14, but I want to read the description of this being. Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus. Again, Tyrus, the prince of Tyrus, the king of Tyrus, is being likened to this evil spirit entity that Isaiah talked about as being fallen, and Ezekiel's going to talk about it too. Thus saith the Lord God, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou art said, I am a God. I sit in the seat of gods in the midst of the seas. Have you ever read Psalms 82, Psalms 89? I've talked about gods before. Yet thou art a man and not God, thou that though thou set thine heart as the heart of God. Behold, thou art wiser than Daniel. There is no secret that they can hide from thee. The devil knows Jesus, right? He knows God personally. There's no secret that we can hide from him. With thy wisdom and with thine understanding thou hast gotten thee riches, and hast gotten gold and silver unto thy treasures. By the great wisdom and by thy traffic hast thou increased thy riches, and thine heart is lifted up because of thy riches. Again, the king of Tyrus is being an example of this fallen being. Oh, take care, Liza Jean, that's all right. Just read Isaiah or Ezekiel 28:14 for who this angel is, this being. Therefore, thus saith the Lord God, because thou hast set thine heart as the heart of God, to replace God, behold, therefore I will bring strangers upon thee, the terrible of the nations, and they shall draw their swords against the beauty of thy wisdom, they shall defile thy brightness. They shall bring thee down to the pit, and thou shalt die the deaths of them that are a stain in the midst of the seas. Again, think of Psalms 82, Psalms 89. Think of what Isaiah said about how the people of the earth will look down upon this individual and say that's the thing that took down the nations. This is almost the same thing. Wilt thou say before him that thou slayest thee, I am God? But thou shalt be a man, and no God in the hand of him that slayeth thee. Thou shalt die the deaths of the uncircumcised by the hand of strangers, for I have spoken it, saith the Lord God. Moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man. Okay, Jesus wasn't the only one that was called the Son of Man, and there's a reason for that. Son of Man and Son of God, these are not something that only Jesus was. Take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord God, Thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom and perfect in beauty. Remember what this angel, this fallen entity from heaven was like. He was the most beautiful of all the creations, right? Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering. The sardius, topaz, and the diamond and the beryl, and the onyx, and the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, and the carbuncle, and gold. The workmanship of thy tabrets and of the pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou wast created, not begotten. He's not a son of God. He's not a Ben Elohim. Now, who is this thing? This is where we find out who it is. And this is what Isaiah was talking about, but he didn't identify who this actual being was. Thou art the appointed, I'm going to call it cherub for your information. In Hebrew, it's called cherub. All right? But you've heard of the cherubim and the seraphim, right? And they're singing, they're at the throne of God and all that. Listen to this. This is Ezekiel 28:14. This is identifying who this evil entity is that does all of this horrible work. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth. And I have set thee so, that thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. Thou wast perfect in thy ways from the day that thou wast created, until iniquity was found in thee. Let's read a little further. By the multitude of thy merchandise they have filled the midst of thee with violence. And thou hast sinned. Therefore I will cast thee as profane out of the mountain of God, out of heaven. And I will destroy thee, O covering cherub. There's that word again, covering cherub. What's he talking about? I'll tell you in a minute. From the midst of the stones of fire, thine heart was lifted up because of thy beauty. Don't we know that about Lucifer? Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom by reason of thy brightness. I will cast thee to the ground. I will lay thee before kings that they may behold thee. Remember I said people look at you and say, you're the thing that did this? Took down the nations? Thou hast denied thy sanctuaries by the multitude of thine iniquities, by the iniquity of thy traffic. Therefore will I bring forth a fire from the midst of thee. It shall devour thee, and I will bring thee to ashes upon the earth in the sight of all them that behold thee. So who is this? What is the cherub that covereth? Let me read that again where it's mentioned, verse 14. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth. You know about the Ark of the Covenant and that there was a mercy seat on it, right? Well, it's a replica of the mercy seat in heaven. This cherub, this most beautiful of all of the created beings, not begotten, of all the created beings, the most beautiful, the most intelligent, the brightest, even though it was a reflected light. It was one of the angels that covered the mercy seat in heaven. That's who he was. He was that close to God. Who was the other? You can take a guess at that. I think if you kind of looked at this thing in a little, like a 60,000 foot view, you might get an idea. This Satan, the one that you know, Satan, that's on his name. Satan is an adversary. The adversary. That's not a name. It's not a proper noun. The proper noun is Hillel ben Shakar, or the, not a proper pronoun, but his description. He is one of the cherubs that covered the mercy seat. There are two of them. And he was one of the ones that stood next to God and covered the mercy seat with another being. We don't know if that other being was a cherub. There's some indications that it was, or somebody else. But we're just going to talk about this one for right now. So, this fallen one, you know as Lucifer, whose name was Hillel ben Shakar in Isaiah, we're now told he was one of the cherubs of the covering, one of the two cherubs of the covering over the mercy seat in heaven. In other words, the throne of God. Cherub of the covering. That's what it means. So you can go to Ezekiel 28:14, read it for yourself. It's plain as day right there. It says that he was that high up in the heavenly order. So is it any surprise that we see evil men on the earth, that as soon as they get a little authority, as they suppose, they almost immediately begin to exercise evil and wickedness? That angel, that cherub of the covering of the mercy seat, fell because of his pride and his wanting to replace God, which is exactly what Harari talks about now. This is Harari, Noah Harari, right? The Klaus Schwab's little man there who wants to, hack all life, including yours, and create, evolve by his intelligent design, denying the intelligent design by God that got us where we are today. Harari is one of the most perfect, more so than even Gates, is a perfect example of this fallen one. But all those leaders of these nations and all these people like Schwab, Harari, Gates, Fauci, Biden, all of them, just like God used the king of Babylon, or Isaiah used the king of Babylon, and Ezekiel used the king of Tyrus as examples of this, and then explained what this heavenly being was like before it fell and then after it fell. That's how all these worldly leaders are, and that's where we come in to Psalms 82 and 89. They were all part of God's counsel. They were gods, and they have turned their back on principle and righteousness, and they will die as men. So, I thought you'd like to know that. Link up for yourself. those two scriptures if you're into the Bible stuff. Again, Isaiah 14:12, about where it says Lucifer, Hillel ben Shakar in the Hebrew, the description of that being, and then Ezekiel 28:14, the description of that being, it's the same being, and it was a being so high up in the heavenly order that it was one of the covering cherubs of the mercy seat in heaven. So is it any surprise that we have all these wicked and evil men trying to destroy mankind here? I thought you all like to know that in case, it slipped by you. A lot of you out there are probably greater scriptorians than I am. But sometimes, we always don't see things because we try to look at it in 20th, 21st century terms. Isaiah 14:12. Who's asking me that? Bonnie in the Spirit, Isaiah 14:12, right? And the other one is Ezekiel 28:14, where we're told he's one of the covering cherubs. And there are two of those over the mercy seat in heaven. One got thrown out, this one, and one remained. And then who replaced the one that was thrown out? Well, we're not told. We could get some ideas, some possibilities. But the point is that that's how high up in the heavenly hierarchy he was. Ezekiel 28:14. So we're at a point now where our nation is so full of corruption, and so are all the Western nations, more so than the three that I mentioned. Brazil, although they're trying to throw Bolsonaro out in Brazil, there's some problems with efforts by NATO and the U.S. doing regime change in Russia with the help of obvious intel operatives that are in there, NGOs. I know Soros has been thrown out of Russia and Hungary, of course. But Oban in Hungary managed to get the election again, even though Soros was against him, and of course NATO and the U.S. So that's where we are. Our nation can't survive like this. But don't kid yourself. That's not because it isn't planned. That's part of the reason why they pushed all this corruption, is so that it can be destroyed from within. And we're letting them do it, because no one will hold these people like Barr and Rosenstein, won't hold those accountable that did the corruption back in 2016 to 2020 and continuing on. And nobody's holding Barr and those guys' feet to the fire either. Instead, our illustrious Senator Ted Cruz has to say that if you don't support Zelensky in Ukraine, you're pro-Russian. No. I wish we had our system, Cruz. But you've helped to destroy it and make it of none effect. Again, there are only three leaders that I know of that care about their people: Bolsonaro, Oban, and Putin. You don't care about Americans, Ted Cruz. You let them get away with all of this in the halls of power of this country. Oh, you get out and you do a little bit of song and dance, but you don't tell the truth. You tell half-truths and lies. I don't even trust Rand Paul. He and Massey are probably a couple of the best, but they've all sold out. They've all sought to sit in the seat of God, and they're all going to die like men. So that's all I got for you today. I wanted to keep this under an hour. I guess I could answer a few questions. Let's see if I can find them here. Okay. No, Angelic Wolf, no, it's not worth saving. Angelic Wolf asked if America's worth saving. America is. The United States is not. And there is a difference. Okay, but the problem is like I said, I mean, the entire population almost is cucked. C-U-C-K-E-D, right? I mean, anything the government says, oh, yes, we've got to do that. As it stands right now, Most of our leaders should be in fear of being tarred and feathered at the very least. Yeah, I think that the people can be worth saving, but they can't keep bowing down to this thing. And I know that's dangerous, but they can't bow down to it. I just saw something I had to see here. Somebody asked a question. Thanks. Gerald Slinte does it all the time. Great. No, I'm not going to watch 2000 Mules. I'm sick and tired of, Trump was in charge. He could have stopped this whole thing, but he chose not to. He played the victim. Like I called him way back when. He's trying to pretend to be the suffering servant of Isaiah. He could have done he could just by stopping Fauci, he could have avoided losing the election. But he didn't. No, he's in on it. I saw a question here. What in Revelation do you think we are? We're in the tribulation. That's I felt that for all the everything's there. I don't know where that was now. Okay, well anyway, let me go on and see what else. Um, yeah, he's playing a role. Yeah, of course. All right. I like the Book of Enoch. However, there are several versions, just so you know. And Enoch was not written by Enoch, of course. It was written probably in about 200 BC, 300 BC, somewhere in there, about the same time that Daniel was around and those guys. Um, it definitely was. I'm not finding fault with that, okay? Because when you look at the Book of Enoch, the Book of Jasher, things like that, not so much the apocryphal works of like the Book of Adam and Eve and those types of things. But I'm saying those really old writings, they give you a lot of insight into what the people were thinking at that point. And because of that, I think it's necessary to know it. One of the things that comes out in these books um, is, and a lot of it moved over into the Gnostic traditions, which was unfortunate. And I explained where the Gnostics came from. It was primarily Greek at first, but then there was a Gnostic movement within Judaism that really took off after the fall of the Second Temple. But it was all part of the Hellenization of Judaism, which a lot of people don't like me talking about, but that's really what traditional Christianity is. It's the Hellenization of ancient Judaism, is what it is. But Enoch and Jasher and those give you insights into what people were thinking about and how they viewed God and the events both in heaven and in earth. I don't agree. Like, who am I to say that? But I find it very disturbing that the Book of Enoch, in some ways, not so much the Book of Jasher, but the Book of Enoch, and certainly some of the Gnostic writings, look down upon women as only creatures that can exist on Earth. In other words, the females, which goes directly against the very first chapter of Genesis. So I have real problems with things like that, because for instance, when Jesus came up and he started talking about that in the kingdom of heaven, there, that there's no male or female or slave or free or whatever. He didn't mean that there aren't the sexes. He meant that you're not going to do this separation thing and treat them differently under the law like some of these other ancient writers tried to say, Enoch being one of them. And again, Enoch didn't write that. Okay, those are the types of things that are coming, that are you have to take into consideration. That's the benefit of reading Enoch. Don't ever accept anything that says that women are somehow creatures only for the earth, and that they're subhuman or they're not men. One of the corrections that was made in the Gnostic scriptures was in the Gospel of Thomas, which is actually pretty good. It's a lot of the sayings of Jesus. And I talked about it before, where the disciples were saying, well, you know, you keep kissing Mary Magdalene on her lips a lot, and you love her more than us. Why do you do that? And he says, why? Kind of in a joke, you know, laughing. You got to be kidding me. Why would I love her more than you? Um, and they said, well, she's not worthy of the life. She's not a male. See, because they were saying that women were just this lower thing, totally ignoring Genesis with God making man, male and female, and then from Adam making a woman, right? Which is all allegorical, and I've talked about that before, that there were pre-Adamites, and Adam was kind of like the Abraham of his day, called out from amongst the other nations to start. It was basically the Abrahamic story, and it was repeated again in Abraham and in Noah. So there were these pre-Adamites that Adam was drawn from, and being created from the dust of the ground. You're created from the dust of the ground. It's just how that's done is in a natural process. It's not like you take a bunch of mud and put it together and hocus pocus and it pops into being. That's not it. You're formed from the dust of the ground, and that's what it's talking about. So that's the natural order of things. But at any rate, so again, Jesus said in this thing in the Gnostic Gospels, in the Gospel of Thomas, he says, well, I will bring her to me and make her male. And you're going, huh? Well, he's talking about marriage. He's talking about bringing her in and having the reconciliation of the opposites. In other words, the male and female are brought back together, and they are treated equally. They have different callings. They have different stations, like women bearing children, men, you know, being the protectors, that kind of thing. But as far as the protection under the law, they'll be the same. There's no difference. That's what it's about. Yeah, I like that. Let's see. It's when Adam names Isha Hava that he understands she is more than a derivative. Well, he said that she is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. And then what's the next thing? And I made an issue of it in one of my previous videos. For this cause shall a man leave his father and his mother and cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. Not for this cause maybe the guy should leave his father and mother, or he can leave his father and mother. No, it's a commandment. For this cause shall a man leave his father and his mother and shall cleave unto his wife. Marriage is a commandment, and again, I'm pointing it out. Jesus did not forego that. If he did, he wasn't the Messiah. James, in this book here, let me bring this down. The brother of Jesus has long been touted to be celibate because of some things that Josephus said about him. But you have to understand the culture that Josephus is writing in. The Romans and Herodians, first of all, they considered circumcision to be a castration. And we know it isn't, but they considered it that. And I talked about St. Augustine probably actually circumcised himself. He probably didn't actually castrate himself to make him a hermaphrodite or, you know, sexless. But Josephus talks about Bannus in here, which scholars have agreed is most likely James, and it talks about his chastity. Well, chastity is not celibacy, okay? If you have sex every day with your wife, you're being chaste, okay? It goes also into the idea of what Jesus said. If a man divorces his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, he causeth her to commit adultery, and he who marrieth her commits adultery. Well, now wait a minute. Does that mean that if you read that the way you're supposed to, you'll understand that, well, adultery is when your wife goes and has sex with somebody else outside your marriage covenant, right? So why did Jesus say you can't divorce a wife save for the cause of fornication, because if you divorce her for anything other than fornication, you cause her to commit adultery, because fornication isn't sex. It can be, but most of the time when it's talking about fornication, the scriptures, it has nothing to do with sexual acts. Well, the understanding of Josephus is that when the Essenes, when the Messianic movement went out into the desert, they didn't take women or children with them. They kept women and children out of there because it was a military camp. And they didn't want impurities to come in there. What kind of impurities? Well, like dogs pooping, women dropping their menstrual blood on, on things when they didn't want that kind of problem there. It wasn't that they disliked women. It's that it was a military camp and they were trying to get ready for war. So the women weren't there. There were parts of the sea movement where the women would be around, but certainly not at Qumran. None of the graves there are of women. None of them. So what was going on here is Josephus said, gee, they don't have women around. Banus, James, is taking a bath several times a day, and I asked him why, and he says, because I don't want to get incontinent, I don't want to lose my seed here, And so Josephus looks at that and says, gee, they're celibate. They don't want to be around women. I am convinced that James was married, because there were attacks on James by Paul on things about James not taking care of his family. If you read into those things where he talks about, Paul says, if you don't care for your family, you're worse than an infidel. Then there's another one where he says, even nature teaches you that long hair on a man is something that's wrong, that's only for women. Not for the Nazarites. What was Paul saying? That was a Nazarite thing, that you didn't take a razor to your head, you let your hair grow. Under certain circumstances, you would cut your hair. But the point is that those were all attacks directly on James, which is why I have a problem with Paul. And there were other things, of course, the whole thing about circumcision and, the Jerusalem Council and Paul not wanting to abide by it. There's a lot of things in there that show that Paul was not the saint that modern Christianity considers him to be. But at any rate, so my point is, men and women are supposed to be together, male and female, and that Paul was right about one thing: the man is not without the woman, neither the woman without the man. And you can't have a male and not have a female, because if you have a male and there's no female, then you are sexless, basically. So it doesn't work by twos. All right. Wow, an hour and 10 minutes now. I don't know that much about Lukashenko, whoever asked that. I'd have to look at that. I'm looking mainly at leaders right now. I still consider Russia to be acting, and China to some extent, to be acting as the Assyrians were used by God in the Bible against Israel. I think Russia, for sure, and possibly China, are in that category. Does that mean that China's good? No. Does that mean that Russia's good? Well, frankly, the way things look right now, Russia looks like more of a righteous nation than the United States does. Oh, is that anti-American to say that? It's true. They don't have this transgenderism and this other stuff that's going on there. I know, yeah, supposedly they were pushing abortion there for a while. Maybe still are. But I'm talking about when you add things up on either side, we are so much worse than most of the other nations of the world right now. Brian, who does New Atlas, he lives in Thailand, and he made that decision because even though Thailand is an authoritarian regime, you know where you stand. They don't tell you one thing and then actually do something else to you bad, right? So he was a Marine, and he served the United States government, and then he saw the corruption like I did, and he wanted to call it out. So he left the United States, and he reports from Thailand. Good move on you, Brian. Didn't you say that fornication was going out of the race? Yes, that's one of the. When James talks about fornication, he's talking about not so much sexual activity, but sexual activity outside of the family, the tribe, Israel is what he's talking about. Yeah, or the situation with a lot of people say that he was against polygamy. What he was really against is the way that they did it. As Jesus said, you don't divorce your wife except for the cause of fornication. In other words, she's been alienated from you for whatever reasons. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean sex, right? Because that would be adultery. So you're not causing her to commit adultery, right? If fornication isn't necessarily sex. I'll just leave it at that. Fornication was another thing. Was fornication was um, um, dining with Gentiles, because they didn't have the same purity laws for cleanliness that the Israelites and even the Jews did. The Herodians, for instance, were actually Edomite Arabs, the leaders that we keep thinking are Jews, and King Herod was Jewish. Well, he was Judean by nationality, but he was certainly not Jewish, not by blood. So his kids were, because some of his kids were, because he married one of the Maccabean princesses, Mariamne, and had children by her, who then would be Jewish or Israelite by blood. However, he killed them. So, that's not really funny, but yeah, he killed his own kids and his own wife. He had Mariamne strangled, executed in court in front of everybody. And then I could tell you what he did with her body, but I don't think we can talk about that here. So anyway, I went roundabout on that. Okay, I think it's time to let everybody go. We're coming up on an hour and 15 minutes. Yeah, fornication is primarily getting alienated, and going outside of the race is a form of fornication. Eating with Gentiles is a form of fornication. Having sex outside of the race, of course, is fornication. Inside, see, the scriptures say, it's in Leviticus, if a man humbles a maid, meaning has sex with her, then he has to take her to be his wife, and he cannot put her away all the days of their lives. Well, but isn't fornication adultery? Isn't fornication evil? Well, it's because that wasn't fornication. But the law was, if you had sex with a woman, you had to take her as your wife. It was the law. There was another place in Leviticus where it says, if a man and a woman have copulation, and the man's seed of copulation is released, which of course, you can almost guarantee it would be, that then they'd have to go and wash themselves and their clothes, and they wouldn't be clean until evening. In other words, they wouldn't be able to engage in things at the tabernacle or sacred ordinances until that evening, which would be the next day. Okay? But that was all to do with hygiene. It didn't have to do with prohibition of the sexual act. It has to do with responsibility, taking responsibility, and maintaining cleanliness as far as, you wash yourself, that kind of a thing. So, yeah. Boy, I'm bouncing around the bush here a little bit. Yeah, Leviticus. Okay, I can't give you the exact verse, but if you go into Google, for instance, or even one of the search engines in one of the, like Strong's or whatever, and you type in on this situation here about that, if a man and a woman lie together, and the man releases his seed, you can read that in there, and then it'll bring it up the okay. St. Petersburg, Russia. Never been there. It's gorgeous. Oh, I'm sure it is. Marcia. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah, everything. That's true. Wide awake and angry. That's my point. I'm anti-American because I'm calling out the evil of this nation. We support Ukraine, which is doing all the same things we're doing, and being the money laundering organization and the biolabs and all that stuff for the criminal politicians in MIC in our country and in NATO. And I'm un-American? I'm anti-American? Jeez. I've talked about her before. There's a lady on Twitter. I think she goes by Fiat Lux Genesis, at Fiat Lux Genesis, and also by the name of Ray. And there was some information that a big asteroid is headed towards the Earth. You know, they tell you this every once in a while. I don't know if it's true or not. But she goes, "Yay!" Talking about getting rid of all this wickedness. Of course, my problem is I don't like to see everybody get punished for what the wicked do. But that's collateral damage. Apparently, even God doesn't stop that. That's troubling to me. Very troubling. Praying for the asteroid. Yeah. Emergency exit. Yeah, I think you've seen her stuff. Yeah. All right. Let's see. Yeah. Well, judgment is coming. See, that's I just read it. And you know, Ezekiel and in Isaiah, even for the wicked one that did this, who fell from heaven. Now, whether that's allegorical or not, I don't think so. I think Ezekiel, maybe not necessarily Isaiah. I would think Isaiah knew about it, but Ezekiel points out the very entity that it is, one of the covering cherubs, not a B'nai Elohim, not a son of God, not a Ben Elohim, a cherub, a created being, just as I've said before. I said that it was a created being, sort of like our AI that they're creating now. Now they want to worship the creation that they've done and make it their God. Well, that's exactly what this cherub of the covering did. Crazy. It's called idol worship, worshiping false gods. The sun shall cleanse the earth. That's what Malachi 4 says. Jesse and I talk about it all the time. Shemesh, not the Son of God, S-O-N, but S-U-N. The sun will rise with healing in it. The Son of Righteousness shall rise with healing in its wings. It's definitely talking about the sun. People want to say that. Hi, Jesse, you're here. People want to say that's Jesus. No, it isn't, and it plainly says so. The closest you can come to that in the Hebrew, in Shemesh, Shemash, changing the vowels, in which case it means minister. So they'll say, well, Jesus was a minister. Well, that's fine. You know, I guess I could go with that. But when you see the sun being used, like in the Valley of Gibeon, when it stopped and the sun stopped and then the moon stopped because Joshua ordered them to, just as an example. Or Jesus talking about the sun shall be darkened and the moon shall be turned to blood, you know, those kinds of things. The sun has some action here. It's Shemesh, not Shemash. So I maintain that it is the sun, and it is going to do something that's going to oh, hi, Billy Jean, you're back. God will use it in some way to take out these evil people. And it's going to burn them up. If you don't have the right heart and mind, not to mention the fact those of us who have not had the extant treatment, right? Or if you're lucky enough not to consume nanotech in any great amount or whatever. No, we almost lost. I guess it means I've got to go. Starting to lose connection here. So that's the other thing. They want to go to these electrical vehicles. Well, how often is our electrical system failing us? And yet they want to get everybody in an electrical vehicle. Do you realize that the system can't sustain that? I mean, they could make 100 times upgrades that we have today and they wouldn't be able to sustain it. So it's all about keeping you from traveling, keeping you under control, has nothing to do, and defeating defeating Americans, real Americans. And our own government is out to defeat real Americans. Okay, they're trying to tell me they're getting rid of me here, so I'm going to go so this whole thing will upload correctly. And thanks for being here tonight. Sorry I stumbled around a little bit at the beginning. When I get angry sometimes, I need to just calm down and just say it the way it is rather than lose my cool. But what they've done is just maddening. Yeah, that's right. Is a consuming fire. Wing zero. YHVHWH is a consuming fire. That's correct. And he uses the tools of the universe. They're all at his disposal. Yeah. All right, everybody. I'm going to go because they're going to cut me off here. Y'all take care. Thanks for being here. Remember Isaiah 14 and Ezekiel 28. The covering cherub of the mercy seat. One of the two covering cherubs. Out here.